Dear Mr. Ambassador, kära ordförande från judiska församlingen, Aron Förständig, vi är glada att ha här. Kära dear guests from Israel och kära Israelvänner. Välkomna till vår Yesods Israeldag här på Berns. Vi ska se hur man pratar den här, så här tror jag. Har ni mig bra? Ja, bra. Staten Israel bildades för snart 70 år sedan. Yesod bildades för 98 år sedan. Vi var med från början när Israel fortfarande var en vision. Och vi är i högsta grad med fortfarande idag. Det var en vision då som var en hård värld. Det var krig, det var förföljelser. Och den här visionen blev till en verklighet. Tack vare insatser från frivilliga som ni. Från andra organisationer som Yesod. Det är inte en självklarhet att Israel finns. Det är fortfarande en hård värld. Israel utsätts för hot, för terror. Och trots en strålande utveckling i Israel, där man trots alla dessa hot och insatser har Israel haft en strålande utveckling. Men vi får inte slå oss till ro och tro att det här är någonting som är givet. Israel är inte givet. Och det är därför vi ordnar en sån här dag som idag. Där vi tar hit en bit av Israel. Där vi berättar om historien och hur Israel har kunnat nå den här aktningsvärda åldern av 70 år. Och vad som krävs och vilka hot som finns så att vi kan sitta här om 10 år och fira Israel 80 år också. Och det är det vi vill göra. Och därför tar vi hit och ordnar de här dagarna. Och det är därför vi fortfarande är viktiga. Och alla ni som sitter här och som hjälper oss, är viktiga för Israel. Därför att på de här 100 åren har inte mycket förändrats. Jag hoppas ni får en trevlig eftermiddag. Men innan Ulf tar vid här och ger lite förhållningsregler, så vill jag, and here I want to turn into English, thank our sponsor, Aron Koslov, from Mizrahi. From Mizrahi Bank. We have other sponsors too who I think want to be a little more anonymous. And the point of having sponsors is, of course, we're going to ask for money in the end. Is that all that money can go not to this event, but to the cause we are asking for. And Ulf will take care of that. So I think Ulf is next. And I hope you will enjoy this afternoon very much, Ulf.
Okay, I'll turn to Swedish. I translated to you, but now I'll turn into Swedish for all of our guests. Det är jättetrevligt att så många är här. Det är i princip fullt. Det är väldigt viktigt för oss att, som Mikael sa, ta hit lite av Israel för alla som inte har möjlighet att åka dit och ta del first hand, så att säga, av det som Israel lever med och som vi kanske inte alltid kan förstå här. Jag vill berätta några praktiska saker för er, och det är att vi har ett litet gäng som hjälper oss som volontärer idag, och då har de såna här små söta skyltar på sig. De ska ni kunna ställa lite frågor till om ni undrar om någonting kring programmet. Jag tror ni har allt i den lilla foldern ni har fått, men om det är någonting så frågar ni någon av oss. Vi kommer att servera någonting att äta under pausen, och jag återkommer till det hur det går till. Jag tror ni kommer glömma det i alla fall. Så jag väntar, ta det innan pausen, vid närmare eftertanke. Det här är våra talare. Ruth är nu på väg hit från flygplatsen. Hon befinner sig i Köpenhamn och tagit ett flyg hit och kommer alldeles snart. Och Ohad Hemo, som är journalist som jag ska introducera snart, kommer därför att vara vår första talare, och efter pausen så kommer brigadgeneralen Ruth Yaron att tala. Så här ser programmet ut. Vi ger varje talare ungefär 45 minuter och sen har vi 15 minuter med lite samtal, frågor och diskussion. Vi har en ganska rejäl paus i mitten. Det är ju ändå viktigt att äta, och det är väldigt viktigt att prata, och det är väldigt viktigt att mingla, som vi alla vet. Minst lika viktigt som att lära oss nya saker och lyssna. Så jag hoppas att den pausen ska fungera bra. Jag vill be er som är aktiva på sociala medier, det finns kanske en del som är det. Jag vill inte att ni checkar in här på Berns. Ni får jättegärna skriva vad ni vill på Instagram och Twitter och Facebook och vad ni vill. Berätta gärna att ni är på ett fantastiskt event med Kärna i Sådd i Sverige. Det är jättebra, det får ni jättegärna göra. Men inte berätta var ni är. Och tyvärr är det här en del av den verklighet vi lever i. Som ni säkert förstår allihop. Så det vill jag gärna be er att tänka på. Och när vi nu är inne på det spåret så vill jag passa på att tacka alla som hjälper oss med säkerheten. Inte minst JSS, Judisk säkerhet i Sverige. Och även andra som hjälper ambassadören och på andra sätt. Säkerhetspoliser och andra som hjälper till. Och vi har, många av dem är ju ideella som gör det här arbetet också. Vi kommer att göra en insamling idag. Vi är Kärna i Sådd, vi sysslar med insamling av medel och det är väldigt viktigt det vi gör och vad pengarna går till. Vi kommer idag att göra en insamling som går till att hjälpa äldre i Israel att kunna fira Yom Ha'atzmaut på ett värdigt och ett bra sätt. Och vi samlar in pengar till olika äldreboenden som många av er vet. Alltså fattiga äldre i Israel som inte har det särskilt lätt hjälper vi med sheltered housing. Så att de ska ha möjlighet att få ett tryggt boende till en kostnad de har råd med. Det vi vill göra nu är att ge dem möjlighet att om en månad kunna ha aktiviteter där de kan fira Yom Ha'atzmaut Israel 70 år på ett värdigt och fint sätt. Så vi tar jättegärna emot gåvor under den här eftermiddagen. Och är ni riktigt duktiga och faktiskt ger via till exempel Swish eller via vår speciella hemsida kan vi till och med ge ett litet resultat i slutet av eftermiddagen. För det är ju så med tekniken, det går väldigt snabbt. Men man kan naturligtvis också fylla i löfteskorten som ni har fått. Ni kan ge kontant om några har med sig det och vill det. Vid vårt informationsbord här ute. Vi har litografier som vi säljer för 700 kronor och alla de pengarna går också till det här projektet. Ett informationsbord som är ute i mingelrummet nere till höger. Ja, det var det. Jag ska nu presentera vår gäst, tänkte jag, Ohad. Och Ohad har arbetat på många olika tv-kanaler, olika medier i Israel. Channel 1, Channel 10 och nu Channel 2. Så han hoppar mellan massa olika kanaler. Och jag la ut på Facebook i morse att det här eventet streamas. Man kan alltså sitta hemma och se detta om man nu inte fick biljett hit. Så att därför också ett särskilt tack till Lawrence Berger som hjälper oss med detta. Helt ideellt. Streama detta live och det kommer också kunna gå att se i efterhand på hans hemsida. Jag återkommer med det senare. Jag la i alla fall ut den länken i morse. Då var det en som kommenterade, en svensk judinna som har gått på Aliyah och bor i Israel. Och så skriver hon, jag önskar att jag var i Sverige och lyssnade på Ohad. Det här är en journalist som jag följer hela tiden. Han är väldigt initierad och kunnig. Och framförallt just om det palestinska samhället. Alltså palestinska ledarskapet, palestinska medier och vanliga palestinier på gatan. Hur de upplever sin situation och sitt liv. Så att jag tror att om vi får den signalen från någon i Israel så tror jag vi kan vara ganska nöjda med vårt val av talare. Så med de orden, very welcome. I tried to say something nice. I don't know. No. Can't always manage, but I try. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I really hope that Ulf said good things about me because my Swedish is not as good as, other languages. Shalom, hello. Great to be here today. I'm very honored and pleased and happy to be here today talking to you. As you've heard, my name is Ohad Hemo. I'm a correspondent for the Israeli Channel 2 TV, which is the biggest TV in Israel, the most viewed TV in Israel, covering the Arab world and specifically the Palestinian issues for 14 years, which is quite a long time. I started my career, to tell you the truth, 14 years ago in Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. These days, I'm working only in the West Bank. Studied my first degree was archaeology and political science in Tel Aviv University. My second degree in Middle East studies in the Hebrew University. I graduated in 2010, and to tell you the truth, ladies and gentlemen, don't take me literally, but I wanted to knock on the door and to ask for the money back. Why? Because it was so boring, so boring. Same regimes, same rulers, same countries for dozens of years. Nothing has changed in the Middle East. And then comes this young boy in 2010 called Mohammed Bouazizi from Tunisia, burning himself to death and creating this earthquake that its influence we feel until today, not only in Israel or in the Middle East, not only in Europe, but actually all over the world. I think that in a way, the Middle East is exporting himself to Europe and other places since that day. If we look today at the map of the Middle East, we're going to find out that it's irrelevant. There are 4 countries at least that does not exist. Each one of it divided to 2 or more entities. Do you know which countries, by the way? Syria, of course. Iraq, of course. Thank you very much. Libya, right? And the last one? Yemen. Great. That's right. And let's, with your permission, make a quick brief over the Israeli boundaries. Do you know these good guys? ISIS. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in post-ISIS world. This is the truth. No more ISIS for you. It's done. It's behind us. In a way, I think that the innovation of ISIS was the fact that for the first time of the modern history, we're talking about an organization, terror organization, that runs a country. And it runs it quite good, to tell you the truth. In its peak, ISIS caliphate was as big as Great Britain. We're talking about 9.6 million people that used to live under ISIS rule. We're talking about annual budget of $2 billion. And then ISIS figured out that you cannot fight the whole world. And they started to decline. The only place in the Middle East today that there is ISIS, it is flourishing, it is growing, they've got prosperity, is here, next to the Israeli border in Sinai. You're talking about a place that today, or until recently, you had approximately 1,000 ISIS members. Today, much more. Because lots of ISIS members are escaping from the caliphate that used to be the caliphate in Iraq and Syria. And they're finding a shelter here in northern Sinai. In a way, I think that Israel's luck is the fact that ISIS agenda is not Israel, but the Egyptians. Egyptian army, 25,000 people that cannot deal with them. But they all know that Israel helps the Egyptian fighting ISIS, bombing them in northern Sinai, so maybe this can be changed as well. I think that this is the story of the Middle East. Let's go to the longest border of Israel, Jordan. Exodus. This is the story. Ladies and gentlemen, what you see here is the 3rd biggest city in Jordan. Do you know it? It's a refugee camp, exactly. Refugee camp called Za'atari. I've been there. Za'atari. And what we see today is millions of people that are moving from here to there, specifically mostly from Syria and Afghanistan. So these countries perceived huge numbers. Lebanon, 2 million Syrian refugees. Jordan, 1.4. Turkey, 3 million refugees, and so on. And this is the gate, of course. This is the gate to Europe. And it's a problem that the Middle East deals with. The Israeli-Syrian border is a 55 kilometers of border. Today, March 2018, only 10 kilometers out of these 55 are controlled by Bashar al-Assad and its allies, Hezbollah and Iran. All the rest is controlled by the rebels, including ISIS and Al-Qaeda. I said that there isn't any ISIS, but ironically, the only places, places that ISIS is still controlling is next to the Israeli border. They're enjoying the Israeli umbrella, in a way, because the Syrian regime is afraid getting close there. Just a few months ago, I've done this, sorry to say, interesting report. I joined the Israeli force in the southern Golan Heights. We went there 3 o'clock in the morning, and in a kind of irrational act, they opened the border to an enemy state. And from the border, you can see above me, from the border, there were 21 women with their children that entered Israel in order to get this health treatment. It happens on a weekly basis. 21 women with their children entering into Israel, to the hospital to get a treatment. I was walking there, working, made some interviews, and then one of the women whispered me, "Go to that woman, she has a good story." So I went to her, we'll see her, this girl, and we were starting to talk, and she told me that in a few hours from now, in 4, 5, 6 hours from now, she's going back to a village in southern Golan Heights, in the Syrian part, and this village is controlled by ISIS still. She's going back to ISIS. I asked her, what's the reality there? Describe me. And she told me, you know, ISIS conquered her village 2.5 years ago. What do you think was the first thing that they've done there? Don't be too graphic or pornographic. But what they did was to burn all the textbooks. No more schools. 2.5 years, her children living in the house. And then she told me all the stories about what happens there. Each month there's an obligation. They have to go to the big mosque in order to see executions. You know, if you were stealing something, so your hand is going to be cut. If you're smoking cigarettes, so they cut your fingers, and so on and so on. So you're talking about a caliphate, the 7th century caliphate, that is rising in front of our eyes in the 21st century. And it's not far from the Israeli border, just kilometers. If I would have told you a few years ago that there are going to be ISIS or Al-Qaeda members, and they're going to sit 100 meters, kilometer out of the IDF soldiers, and it's going to be the most quiet border of Israel, you would have laughed, and rightly so. But this is the truth. This is what happens. And in order to understand exactly what happens next to the Israeli border there, I had to come to Germany. I've done this series of reports about the Islam in Europe, and I went to Germany. It was a few months ago. I went to a place called in Berlin, to a neighborhood in Berlin, and I met a guy, Neukölln neighborhood, and I met a guy that used to be Al-Qaeda member for 10 years. Started his terror career in 2005, Syrian guy. He went to Iraq, he met Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the great founder of ISIS. Then he came back to Syria, located himself next to the Israeli border, and waited. And then the uprising started. 10 years of terror. Unbelievable story. And I met this guy in Germany. We were talking. I made an interview with him. He's got a great story. He started as a member of Al-Qaeda, just normal warrior, and then he became a cleric. And he told me that during the years, he sentenced lots of people to death because they weren't Muslims. He said that he's done just great crimes. And after 10 years, he said to himself, I cannot deal with this. The Islam that I know is a Damawi, he said. In Arabic, Damawi means bloody Islam. And I or commit suicide or I convert. So he converted to Christianity. By the way, he managed to penetrate Europe in 2015 during the big wave of refugees. It tells us something about what happens, I think, here in Europe. He's from Al-Qaeda. His brother is from ISIS. They live in Germany. The intelligence forces, the local intelligence forces, does not know anything about the background of these people. It's unbelievable. 99% of the interviews that I make, I always know what's the motivation, what's the interest of the guy who's standing in front of me. Not here, I couldn't understand. He's talking, he's telling, and I cannot understand what does he want to achieve from this thing. So after we finished everything, I asked him, so what's the reason for you to talk? And I show you this. We had like a small chat while my cameraman is filming. Look what he said.
أحلم إني أتواصل مع إسرائيليين، رحت لهم أيام التنظيم، جيت إجازة على تركيا، رحت على السفارة، ما استقبلوني.
عودنا مشيخ ما استقبلوه.
ليه؟ لأنه ما عندي لغة، إيه رحت على باب السفارة، أساعدهم بالعمل الأمني داخل سوريا، هذا كثير أنا قوي فيه. العمل الأمني. كمقرات سرية، كسجون، كمقرات الأمراء الكبار.
Did you understand what happens here? He was trying to recruit the Mossad. He was trying to help Israel. Of course, I tried to help him. He didn't. Israel didn't want his cooperation, so this is the reason for me to show this. But it's interesting. My job let me, or make me make some very interesting meetings like this. I told you that I made this series of reports about the Islam here, and what I found is quite frightening, some would say terrifying reality. There's a guy in Brussels called Ismail Saidi. Do you know him? He's a very unique and interesting voice, Muslim guy that was born in Molenbeek. You know Molenbeek, the neighborhood, the ghetto, call it whatever you want. So he's a Muslim from there. He was born there. And he said, he made a play, he wrote a play called Jihad after two of his best friends from school that left Brussels and arrived to the battlefields of Syria and Iraq, became an ISIS members. And we had a great interview, and we were talking, and then we were talking about anti-Semitism. We were talking about it, and this guy told me, you know, that since I was born, since I remember myself, I know that the problem of Israel, the problem of the Islam is Israel, is the Jews. Now, I've never met a Jewish guy in my life. I don't know where Israel is located on the map, but yet, that's what I know. And it's not only me, he told me, it's a whole generation of young Muslim people who were born here in Europe and believes in this way. Now, we're talking about kind of indoctrination. Look what I found. This is in Germany. While I made these reports, this is in Germany. Textbooks. Textbooks that are distributed there, of course, underground educational system. Its origin is from the Middle East, from Tunisia. And you could see all the motives of the old European anti-Semitism. You know, the Jews with the big noses, Israeli soldiers that are killing young, small Palestinian children, and so on, and so on, and so on. And it's there. And it's unbelievable that there are lots of young people who are learning from this. Of course, underground, but still, this phenomena is here, and it should be a problem for us. As part of these reports, I pretended as a Palestinian. I speak fluent Arabic, and I entered some, you know, mosques, for instance. It was unbelievable, the incitement there. You couldn't believe, because there isn't any supervision of the country. I'm not sure that the country does know about these places. So what I've heard, they thought that I'm a Palestinian guy. I was told crazy things. The Jews, sons of the monkeys and the pigs. We didn't say it. The Quran or the Hadith said these things. People were talking about conquering Europe. I was talking to a guy in France, and he told me, last time we tried to conquer Europe was in 1683, during the siege over Vienna. We failed back then, but now we are doing this. And you hear these kind of things. So I was entering into the mosque of Amédi Coulibaly. Do you know him? He's the guy, the ISIS member, who made the terror attack in the Hypercacher in France. So I entered into the mosque, pretended as a Palestinian. Just give you an example what I've heard.
السلام عليكم.
هي ثاني ديانة الإسلام.
اوكي.
فرنسا. ثاني ديانة الإسلام.
وبالمستقبل بدها تكون أول ديانة في فرنسا؟
الفرنسيين بزاف فرنسيين دخلوا الإسلام. هم خايفين أولادهم داخلين الإسلام.
قول لي حسب رأيك فرنسا بدها تكون دولة مسلمية؟
والله أعلم. إن شاء الله. إن شاء الله. يجي نهار كل الأرض تكون مسلم. إن شاء الله.
كيف بدكم سيطروا على فرنسا؟
والله لا المسلمين إن شاء الله يتحدوا المسلمين. يتحدوا المسلمين في البلاد بتاع العرب.
Talking about anti-Semitism, it's not really, but you know, lots of people in the Middle East, and I guess that not only in the Middle East, thinks that, you know, Israel, the Jews are controlling the whole world. I'll give you an example. I have a good friend of mine from Hebron, Palestinian guy from Hebron, and his brother used to be a member of Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades, which is a terror organization. A few years ago, Israel tried to assassinate him. He was injured quite badly. He lost his conscience. And whenever his conscience came back, so he told me that he was sleeping somewhere, and he heard Hebrew, women and men talking Hebrew. And then he opened his eyes. He was in the hospital. Then he opened his eyes and he saw men and women wearing white dress. And he said to himself, oh my God, also in heaven, Jews are controlling the world. So the Jews among us, we have something to expect for. Everything is okay. I'm kidding, but it's a story that tells us, I think, much more about this thing. There's an attempt to make this distinguish between Zionism and Judaism, of course. I had the chance to make an interview with Ismail Haniyeh, number one of Hamas, the head of Hamas. I entered into Gaza Strip, to his house in a Shati refugee camp, and had this chance to talk to this guy. He's very important in Hamas, of course, as I said, number one. And after the interview was done, we were sitting in his saloon, and I was asking him, as an Israeli citizen, not as a reporter, what do you say? What do you think is going to be the end of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? He didn't weep. He just looked at me and he told me, at the end of the day, we're going to conquer you. It's going to take, and I quote, 10 years, 100 years, or 1,000 years. We have time. Sabr wa sumud in Arabic, which means we have patience. Where do you come from? He asked me, and I said, I'm an Israeli. Your parents? Israelis. Grandmother, grandfather? Iraq, Morocco? Go back there. The golden age of the Jews was under the rule of Islam. Go back there. That's what he told me. And if I mention kind of anti-Semitism, so I really like to make interviews with children, because you always get the pure view, no filters. So look, I had this interview with a young guy. Look what he told me.
انت مثلا تسمع عن عمليه تعني للصاغه جوا شو ردود فعلك؟
انا بفرح.
انت بتفرح؟ بتكيف ليش؟
عشان واحد من اهل يعني من فلسطين طعن اليهود. يعني احنا علمنا اليهود ياخذ درس.
تعرف انه انا يهودي؟
لا.
انا يهودي.
انت يهودي؟
انت حتكون فرحان اذا مثلا واحد طعني؟
Not really funny, but, you know. Last border, with your permission, the northern border. If you ask any source today in the IDF, in the Israeli Intelligence Directorate, they will tell you that this is the enemy par excellence of Israel. Israel is preparing itself, or the IDF is preparing itself to the third Lebanese war. Just recently I've heard that Hezbollah is known as the strongest non-state organization that exists today in the world. We're talking, just to give you some numbers, we're talking about during the Second Lebanese War, they had between 12 to 18,000 rockets and missiles. Today they've got, do you know? 130, exactly, 1,000, 10 times missiles. I was talking to someone in the army that told me that they're expecting that the next third war with Lebanon, in the next war with Lebanon, the skyline of Israel, of Tel Aviv actually, is going to change. out of these missiles. You know that once in a while we hear that someone bombed a convoy of ammunition that lives from Syria towards Lebanon. I think that we all know what's the reason for this. During the next war, the expectations in Israel is that we'll see these Hezbollah members trying to penetrate Israel and to conquer some inhabitants, some bases, military bases, and so on. Why is that? Because in this world, the symbols really matters. And if you see this yellow flag is waving over an Israeli base or inhabitant, it means one thing, a clear victory. And I think that this kind of thing we're going to expect to see. So it sounds quite frightening, to tell you the truth. ISIS and Hamas and Al-Qaeda, and let me surprise you. I think that Israel's position today is quite good. Actually, it's very good, because of two reasons. First, I think, as far as I understand, for the first time of the history of Israel, we don't have today any existential threat. We don't have it. There isn't any big Arab army that sits next to our border and just waiting for the opportunity to enter, to penetrate, and to conquer some cities. You don't have it. The other thing is maybe more interesting. It's something to do with the Arab Spring. Ladies and gentlemen, during dozens of years, the paradigm in the Middle East said that Israel is responsible for the inferiority, for the ignorance, for the poverty of the Middle East. If you remove Israel, everything is going to be great. This is what they were thinking. If you ask 380 million Arabs around us, I guess a few years ago, I guess that was their answer. But things are changed. And in front of our eyes, during the last few years, there's a big, huge conflict that raises. Its sources are in the 7th century, but today we feel it really good. Internal conflict in the Arab world. Do you know which conflict I'm talking about? Sunni and Shia, you know. Sunnis, 85% of the Muslim world. Shia, only 15%. The Shia is led by Iran. For years, there was a gatekeeper called Saddam Hussein, Iraq, prevented Iran to increase its influence, to, you know, to send its, arms of the octopus towards the whole Middle East. But then Saddam Hussein fell down. And what we see these days is Iranians all around. Syria, Iraq, South Lebanon, Yemen. We see them all everywhere. And Israel, that used to be the problem, became part of the solution. Because today we have a common interest with the majority of the Middle East that is terrified out of Iran. What we see these days is a corridor that starts in Tehran and ends in northern Israel, South Lebanon. That's the point. And this Arab world, Sunni world, became to cooperate with Israel. Very intimate relationship, military, intelligence, and so on. And this is definitely very interesting. But I think that in order to become part of the Middle East, there's a small problem, really small, minor problem that we have to solve. It's called the Palestinians. We solved it, everything is going to be okay. In order to understand, as far as I understand, what happens today in the arena, the Palestinian arena, I want to take you in the time tunnel to 2006. 2006, there's December, actually, 2006, there's a serious attempt, actually this first serious attempt, to launch a rocket, not from Gaza Strip, but from the West Bank towards Israel. Who's responsible for this attempt is this guy. His name is Ashraf Saadi. He's the head of the Islamic Jihad. He used to be, the head of the Islamic Jihad in northern West Bank. He was climbing over the refugee camp of Jenin. He tried to launch this rocket towards Israel. I'm sure that the honorable audience here understands what does it mean. It means to paralyze Israel if the Palestinian has these rockets in the West Bank. He's Islamic Jihad member, actually the head of the Islamic Jihad. They never talk to Israelis, never. If you compare Islamic Jihad, so Hamas is like a Zionist organization. I'm not kidding. It's very, very, very extremist, very. I've never talked to Islamic Jihad before, and I applied to talk to him, and the day after he said, yes, come. So I came there to the refugee camp of Jenin, Palestinian place, very frightening place, to be honest. It was like a horror film, really. I was entering into this destroyed house, and there were two people that waited for me. This guy and his assistant, long beard, with his Kalashnikov, quiet, sitting aside. And I made this interview with this guy, very interesting interview. He told me how did he get the information to launch the rocket and to create the rocket and blah, blah, blah. And then he added at the end of the interview, next time I'm going to hit Afula. Afula is a northern city in Israel. So I'm going to manage to hit Afula. He didn't have the chance. He didn't have the chance at all. 2 months later, he was killed, assassinated by Israel. Now let's go 10 years later. 10 years later, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sitting in my house getting this phone call from unknown source. Salamu alaikum, alaikum salam, we start to talk. And whenever this guy tells me his name, I was also almost fainting, because he's the head of the Islamic Jihad today in northern West Bank. And then he started to speak Hebrew. And he asked me, great Hebrew he had, do you remember me? I told him no. We never met. Do you remember Ashraf Saadi? Yes. Do you remember his assistant? Yes. So it's me. And after 10 years, he became the head of the Islamic Jihad today. I didn't know that, but he's the guy. I asked him what's the reason for him to make this phone call, and he said, I invite you to Jenin refugee camp. Why? Surprise. You like surprises? I like. So I just wanted to go and, to do it. But then he added something which was a little bit problematic for me. He told me, you're going to see me there. I'm going to arrange everything. Don't approach me. Don't look at me. Don't whisper towards me. Don't do anything. And I would ask him why. What's the reason? I mean, Jenin refugee camp is a place that without any background you cannot enter there. And he told me, because I have a reputation. I'm Islamic Jihad member. I cannot invite Israeli journalists, but I do it. So I promise you that you go alive out of this camp. That's what he told me. So I went to the camp, and I entered there, and what I see before is that this refugee camp, and there's a reason for me to tell this story, around it there was lots of masked armed men, and it appears to be Unit 101, the Palestinian Unit 101. It's the elite unit of the Palestinians, and it was established in order to fight the mortal enemy of the PA, of the Palestinian Authority. Do you know who is the mortal enemy? Hamas, exactly. Because the confrontation between Hamas and the PA, the Palestinian Authority, between Hamas and Mahmoud Abbas, is confrontation about the identity of the Palestinian future state. Is it going to be like Gaza, based or led by the Sharia laws, very religious, or is it going to be a secular country? And the hatred there is unbelievable. So outside there's the PA, and inside there's Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and one crazy, Israeli correspondent who enters. So I just want to show you a part of this report, and I think that it's very important for us to understand what happens today in the Palestinian arena. So let's see it and continue.
شو بتعملوا هون؟
بنفر بهالمخيم.
لكن هذا مش حقيقي مبين.
مش حقيقي.
لعبة أطفال؟ وإنتوا إيش؟ شو دوركم؟
مقاومة.
המטרה העיקרית היא שליטי המחנה בפועל שמפציעים משום מקום כמו רוחות רפאים. מה שאתם רואים זה כבר גז מדמיע שכוחות הרשות יורים בכיווננו. הידיים של חלק מהאנשים כאן גם מטענים מאולתרים.
טוב, אפשר כבר לשמוע את הירי של כוחות הביטחון הפלסטינים שמתקרבים, נכנסים לכאן לפתח המחנה. כל הצעירים נמצאים שם, שומעים כאן ירי חי, אז אנחנו ברשותכם הולכים למצוא מחסה.
אנחנו רצים למצוא מחסה בתוך סמטאות המחנה, אלא שדווקא שם, ללא התראה מוקדמת, אנחנו מוצאים את עצמנו בלב הקרב, ודווקא בצד של חמושי המחנה, אנשי פתח, מצידם, אנשי חמאס וג'יהאד איסלאמי.
כן, אתם יכולים לראות את החמושים האלו, אנשי ג'יהאד איסלאמי מאחורינו. הרשות הפלסטינית נמצאת במרחק של משהו כמו 300-400 מטר. אפשר כבר לראות ממש כניסה למצב, לירי. יש כאן ממש מלחמה אמיתית על המחנה. ברגע זה אפשר לשמוע את קולות הירי. السلام عليكم. حرب حقيقي.
صحيح.
ايش في هسه؟
كان في معنا مهرجان نصرة الأقصى، طبعا اتدخلوا هذول السلطة. احنا بنعتبر من اللحظة هاي انهم هذول شركاء مع الاحتلال.
Just normal day in the office, kind of. You know, when I went out of there, this guy who invited me made this phone call. He was laughing. He said, "I hope that you have a great report." And then he added, "I ask you, please, I beg you, erase everything. I don't want nor Israel nor the PA to identify my people because they will be caught." And a day later, I got this video in the WhatsApp from the guy, Islamic Jihad member, who was following me. And I saw 20 seconds of a movie, and I saw his house, and it was demolished, destroyed by the PA, by the Palestinian Authority. And what's the reason? Because he helped in Israeli entering and showing the world these pictures. What is the importance of this thing? In a way, two things. In a way, I think that it's like the book of George Orwell, 1984. Do you remember the room 101? It's the thing that you're most afraid of. And this is what Israel and the Palestinians mostly are really most afraid of. This vacuum, this chaos, anarchy. And we see these things today in some places in the Palestinian Authority. But if Mahmoud Abbas, 23 years old, the Palestinian leader, will pass away today or whatever, I think that what we've seen right now is going to be, there's a good chance that it's going to be the reality in the West Bank. If it happens there, maybe it's going to be the next intifada, we can call it, the next uprising, and we should really be worried about this chance. But it's more than this. Moreover, I think that in a way what we see today in the Palestinian arena is kind of Palestinian spring. You know, lots of people talking in the manners of democracy, freedom of speech. They really demand it, not only from Israel, but from the PA, from the Palestinian Authority. According to the last polls, 70% out of the Palestinians does not want to see Mahmoud Abbas in its position. And it's a problem. You're talking today of more than 100,000 Palestinians, graduates of universities, who are sitting at home, unemployed. This is the fuel for the next uprising. Really. You know, Mubarak, just think about it. Mubarak, Hosni Mubarak, he had 2 million people in his secret services in 2011. And within 1 month, he lost his position. Why? Because he lost the legitimacy, and I think that this is what happens these days in the Palestinian arena. And it's quite funny, you know, because there's lots of changes. And especially, I think the media is playing a very important role. You know, whenever I entered here into this fight in Jenin refugee camp, one of the masked men approached me, and he asked me in Hebrew, where can I see this report? One of these Islamic Jihad, masked men. And I told him, in Channel 2. When is it going to be broadcast? Tomorrow. There's a problem, he told me. What's the problem? We don't have Channel 2 in the camp. It was so funny. Really, fight, explosives, everything. And we're standing and thinking, how is he going to see this report? And then he told me, after a few seconds, he asked me, do you have a Facebook? I told him, of course. He took his Kalashnikov, he put it aside, he took out his phone, iPhone, entered into the Facebook, gave it to me, and asked me to write my name. And then, what do you think he's done? Friend request. Islamic Jihad member, pure terrorist, asked me a friend request. And I don't know about you, but I did accept. I did accept whenever his rifle is in front of me. It's a funny story, but it tells us so many things about this era, this period of time. Really, everything is changing. I call it the privatization of terror. Once the terror, you didn't have any face. You didn't know anything about them. They were, back there, after the walls. Today, they're friends of mine in the Facebook, Twitter. I follow them, they follow me. I know his friends, his girlfriends, what he likes, which kind of books he likes, everything. Craziness. That's what I think. And I think that one of the problems is the fact that really, in the two sides, the new generation does not know the other side. When I'm entering these Palestinian territories, always, whenever I talk to people in my age or older, they know Hebrew. They have been to Israel. They know us directly. So they don't hate. Because whenever you know, you don't hate. But the new generation, in Israel and in the Palestinian side, he doesn't know the other side. He doesn't know his language. He's never been there. And you can feel this hatred. And there's a funny thing, not funny, but always the prison became a place that even people who've done terrified crimes, they get to know you. I've done this report about a guy, 15 years old Palestinian guy, who stabbed a female Jewish girl to death. I try to understand his logic. What's the reason for him to do this? He never, as he said in his investigation, he never met an Israeli in his life. So I went to his house and I made a stand-up. Stand-up in the TV language means whenever you stand and talk into the camera, me. So it means I'm here. So I'm standing there making this stand-up, and then a vehicle, Palestinian vehicle, comes there with 4 people inside, and they all Hamas members. You can tell easily. The Hamas members, they look at me. I'm in the middle of Palestinian territory, no Israelis, kilometers out of there, and I'm standing, and they know me, of course, and they're waiting. So I'm entering my car, and I'm leaving, and then they're following me, and it's really, it's southern Hebron, it's no man's land. I was isolated. And then they stopped the car and prevented me getting on, and went out of the car and just stopped me and asked me to open the window. 4 Hamas members, frightening. I opened my window, and then one of them approached me with a smile and told me, Hemo is my family name, Hemo, I must do selfie with you. Really. What's the story? The story is that these 4 people, Hamas members, were in jail. They came out of jail, and in jail, what do you watch? Channel 2. And what do you read? Yediot Achronot or Haaretz. So you get to know Hebrew. And I must tell you that there are lots of Palestinian terrorists who today talk in totally different language. It's unbelievable, really. It's a very unique phenomenon, I think. And I went there. They are from Bet Awa. Bet Awa is a village next to Hebron. Hamas, very strong Hamas base. I went there. I made this report. They entered me into a family of a guy, Palestinian guy, who sent suicide terrorists to kill 12 Israelis a few years ago. So I went there and I made very interesting interviews and report. And then 3 months ago, exactly 3 months ago, I entered into the jail, Israeli jail, to make discussion, just to talk with the Palestinian prisoners. And I was entered into the Hamas place, and I was talking to Hamas leaders, at least, each one of them, at least 30 life sentences, really. And then one of these Hamas members, he approached me, and he was standing like 20 minutes, it was 3 months ago exactly. He was standing like 20 centimeters next to me, and he told me, "Do you recognize me?" In Hebrew. I said, "No." He told me, "Look, you were in my house. You were drinking the water that my father gave you. You were eating the food that my mother prepared for you, and you called me a terrorist." And then he went. It was the guy that I've done the report in his house. Why do I tell you this story? Because it's an interesting story, and I think that in a way it shows you, I won't say the dilemmas, because I don't have any dilemmas. My identity is very clear. Israeli, Zionist, Jewish, everything is okay. But still, you're alone, and you're going to the other side, and you're making interviews or reports with the other side with all what does it mean. And believe me, every word that comes out of my mouth, the other side record it, knows it. So just interesting position. And just before we end and open it to Q&A, I tell you that I think about the current situation, that there is a problem. I'm not sure that it's an innovation for you, but there is a problem, a real problem, because there isn't any negotiation between Israel and the PA, because of lots of reasons. But whenever you don't have any talk, to this vacuum enters very dangerous trends, thinkings, like what? I'll give you an example. The BDS. You know the BDS, I guess. The BDS is something that is here in Europe or in the States, not in the Palestinian territories, never. But now, normalization, always it was a problem. Today, it's much more problem than it used to be. And we're talking about BDS. Ladies and gentlemen, I was not on the last, on the flotilla, not the last one before. Flotilla to Gaza. Only Israeli that went on the flotilla to Gaza. It was very funny story, not funny, but strange story, I'll tell you. I got this phone call from someone that I know. He told me, if you want to go to the flotilla, you have to get today to Crete. So I went to Crete, to Heraklion, and then he told me, you have to go to this place, to this hotel, go down to the lobby tomorrow morning, and they're going to expect you. So I went there, and I saw a guy in the lobby that definitely is not from Crete, from the Middle East, one with long beard and everything. I approached him in the morning. I told him who I am, and then this guy, he heard that I'm an Israeli. He said, "Ba'tadhir minnak." In Arabic, it means I don't want to talk to you, and went. By the way, he has only one hand. And then he came back after a few minutes, and he told me, "Okay, checked out, everything is okay with you. Salamu alaikum." And then he told me his name, and I said, "Okay, nice to meet you." And he told me, "Don't you recognize me? Don't you know me? Please make Google." And went. Do Google. So I Googled him, and I found out that this guy that I'm standing to is the biggest fundraiser of Hamas in Europe. And this guy is one of the organizators of the flotilla. Everything to do together. And then a few days later, 2 days later, I went on this boat towards Gaza. 18 people were on this boat. Lots of them are BDS activists, mostly from Sweden. I must tell you, I reached on this boat in 2 o'clock in the morning. 3 o'clock in the morning, I understood that if I want to get alive out of this flotilla, I shouldn't talk to anyone. Why? Because what I found out is a real pure anti-Semitism. Really. They didn't talk about, 67 borders, 48 borders, settlements. No. Israel does not have the right to exist. Israel is a colonialist project that should be erased out of the map. This is the language. That's what we're talking about. So we're talking about BDS that enters into the Palestinian arena. We're talking about one-state solution supporters. A lot of Palestinians today tells me, everywhere, cities, refugee camps, they tell me, we want to live like you. No more fences. Let's live together in one state. From the river to the sea, one state. Everything's going to be peaceful, beautiful. This is the nightmare of the Zionism, because it means that the Jews are going to be minority in Israel. And I think that in a way, it's for us, a very important thing to talk, to create this discourse, and to continue on. Thank you very much, and I open it for questions. Thank you. Do we have time, Ulf?
So I just want to thank you. I'm get a little worried now. I was happy when we managed to get you here, but now I hear which friends you have, so I'm not so sure. I mean, we fundraise for Israel, and you made fundraisers for something else. So thanks for being here. But I wasn't aware, but okay. So Eva has a microphone. Yes, so we have a question.
Thank you. I think it was very interesting. I'm also getting worried if I add you on Facebook, I will have like common friends with half of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Anyway, thank you very much. I think it was very interesting. And you mentioned towards the end Sweden and the Swedish involvement. I think many of us here are very interested in your views. So, as of course you know, in 2014, Sweden recognized Palestine. And now, past about 3.5 years, can you see any effects on the conflicts, on the situation in the Palestinian Authority of the Swedish recognition?
To tell you the truth, no. No. It's like two parallel lines, let's call it like this. I think that in a way, if you look today about the Palestinian ideology, what are you going to do? So you've got two ways of thinking. One is the muqawama. Muqawama is struggle in Arabic, and it's Hamas way. Okay, we're going to free Palestine through struggle. Failed. The other one is the mufawadat, which means masawmatan, negotiation, of course, negotiation. And it failed as well. After 25 years of talking, the Palestinian says, we don't have any horizon. The situation is as bad as it used to be. So I think that in a way, the third path today, as we see, is a kind of uprising, diplomatic uprising. This is what Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas is trying to do. Okay, I'm going to undermine the Israeli legitimacy, out there in the diplomatic way. But it fails as well. So you've got the UN and you've got, all of these organizations, but on the ground, I think that you don't really feel the effect of the foreign policy, European foreign policy, and so on.
Okay, we have a question here.
Please.
Toda for your story.
Thank you very
it was
much.
very interesting. I have one question. It is very simple. How do the Palestinians get their weapons, and how do they get there to the territories when you've been on? Thank you.
How do I get there?
No, how the weapons travel.
Yeah.
The route. Thank you.
Yeah, whatever, that's right. We are Marxist. Wherever you get money, you can do anything. They have money. Some of the money comes from abroad. We're talking about Iran, for instance, really helps Hamas and Islamic Jihad. You're talking about lots of sources of fundraising. Actually, to tell you the truth, most of the weapons are stolen from Israeli military bases. Yeah, wherever there are crimes, so you can find people, human, and most of the rifles arrive from Israeli bases, military bases. This is the truth. But you don't find anything but rivals in the West Bank. So, in Gaza, by the way, it's a totally different thing. I didn't speak about Gaza a lot, or at all, to tell the truth. But Gaza is a really problematic place because at the end of the day, the war. I mean, okay, let's say something about Gaza. Hamas is trying to do anything, as far as I understand, in order to avoid war. But he's trying to do everything in order to prepare himself to the next war with Israel. So if we're talking about weapons, smuggling from the smuggled tunnels, of course, under the border between Sinai and Gaza. Until 2013, there were over 1,200 tunnels like this. And the economics of Gaza were based on these tunnels. But then Sisi shut down it. And now there isn't any shortage in Gaza, but people does not have money to buy things. You know, everything enters it through Kerem Shalom. Kerem Shalom is it's between the border between Israel and the Palestinians. But now people does not have money. So that's the problem of Gaza. We're talking today about a place that in 2020, no drinking water. We're talking about a place that electricity, for instance, they've got between 4 to 6 hours a day. That's it. Not because of Israel's fault, by the way, because the PA does not pay the money for this electricity. You're talking about 47% of unemployment in Gaza. And I think that the great ambition of every Gazan people is just to escape out of the strip. Please.
My question is, where do you get the courage from?
Some would say courage, some would say stupidity. You can choose. It's a good question. Let me be honest for a moment. Since I became, no, I wasn't honest until now, but since, it's kind of a personal thing. Since I became a father, it was 5 years ago, I lost my courage, believe me. I mean, this is after I lost my courage, what you've seen right here. It is frightening. It is frightening. In the dictionary of the struggle between the Israel and the Palestinians, so they never hit any Israel correspondent until today. But even this, I think, it's changing in front of our eyes. Why? Because lots of voices against normalization, for instance. To see Israeli from Channel 2 talking in Hebrew in this kind of situation. A week ago, I've been to Balata refugee camp, very frightening place. There were like hundreds of Kalashnikov next to me, and there was a prisoner who was released out of the jail. And I'm speaking Hebrew inside this place. No Israelis never enters there. It was frightening, to tell you the truth. But this is my job. This is my duty. I think that in a way, my job is to remind the Israelis that there are 4 million Palestinians who's waiting in the West Bank and in Gaza and waiting for, we have to solve the problem. It doesn't matter if you're right wing or left wing, but we have to solve it. And my duty is to remind the Israelis that we have still this kind of problem. Please.
What is the attitude of the Israeli Arabs? Can you tell us something about the trends and attitudes?
Definitely. The Israeli Arabs, we're talking about 1.4 million approximately, good citizens, really, mostly they're good citizens. I mean, I would say that there are few dozens of people who joined ISIS, that's it, few dozens, not more. I would say that 99% of the Israeli Arabs are, I won't say 99%, but the majority of the Israeli Arabs are really, I think, believe with getting involved in the Israeli society. The number of children that they're bringing is reduced as long as more people are, and especially more women are entering into the educational system and jobs and everything. So the Israelization, I think it's much more dramatic than the Palestinization. Okay, you've got these two kinds of lines. So I hope that I replied.
A question. You described very good imagery, the tension between the intellectual democratic Palestinians, the violent jihadists, and the establishment of PLO, the triangle. And they're waiting. But we saw from the Arab Spring what happened when the vacuum came and the rise of ISIS and so on. Can Israel influence this? How can we avoid a new vacuum? Because we know violence wins in the end. So how can we strengthen that? And can Israel strengthen it? Is Israel a power?
We're talking about the Palestinians, right? Yeah. I think that in a way, we have a luck that there is this Arab Spring. Why? What's the reason? Because the Palestinians, they look on the right and they see Syria. They look at the left and they see Iraq or Yemen. And I think that mostly they're afraid of getting to these places. So there is a problem because the agenda of the Arab world forgot the Palestinians. A few years ago, every news were opened by the Palestinian things. Today, everyone forgot them, to tell you the truth. But I do believe that also in the other side, they understand the meaning of uprising like this. And it's interesting because we're talking about more than 15 years after the second intifada, the second uprising, and still today, most of the Palestinian, I think, as far as I understand, does not support any struggle like this. Suicide bombers, they stopped. Why? Only because of the IDF? No. I believe no. Because they understand what they're going to lose if they're going to continue this. So there is a vacuum. There are lots of risks talking about this vacuum. But in a way, I think that the Arab Spring made the Palestinians understand what they can lose if they join it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Really hope you enjoy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm still worried about your friends, but I don't think I'll accept your friendship requests. Be on the safe side. Thank you. I have a little something for you. Little heavy, but if you know anything about Sweden, you might know what it is. Good. So this was a great speaker, wasn't it? This was the first part. We have another one after the break. Nice to see you here, Ruth. So I'll go over to Swedish. Nu har vi paus och jag vill er att låta värdarna gå ut först, därför att värdarna ska hjälpa oss med utdelning av den lilla maten vi ska få. Så ni som hjälper oss kan gå ut nu och hjälpa till med det. Vad vi kommer att göra är att strax utanför ingången här så finns det ett bord och där kommer vi stå och dela ut wraps. Det kommer finnas kaffe och te och vatten lite överallt ute i loungen. Ni som har beställt speciella wraps, alltså meddelat allergier eller liknande, ni går till baren i mitten. Där finns personalen här på Berns och delar ut dem till er. Och så ska ni absolut passa på att ge en gåva nu. Det är faktiskt därför också som vi är här. Och som jag sa innan, vi vill hjälpa de här äldre att få en fin omhatsmot i Israel. Så ni har all information ni behöver på skärmen här. Ni har den i era program och så vidare. Och vi ses vid 4 ungefär. Kommer vi tillbaka hit och ses igen. Så länge.
Ja, har alla kommit in? Hoppas rappen smakade och ni har hunnit mingla i pausen. Då kommer vi till andra delen av vårt program. And I will introduce Brigadgeneral Ruth Yaron sitting here, and I will make a short introduction in Swedish. Introduce you. Most important, you are a mother of 2 children and have 3 grandchildren, which is, I think, the most important thing. And now we'll take the rest in Swedish. Ruth har en utbildning i politisk vetenskap och nationell säkerhet. Har tjänstgjort inom israeliska utrikesdepartementet i Washington bland annat med postering. Och varit media advisor, alltså mediarådgivare. Och även varit chief spokesperson, talesman för IDF, israeliska armén. hon har berättat för mig att hon visst är brigadgeneral, men framförallt är hon lärare. Började som instruktör på Israels nationella säkerhets 2000 till 2002 och har nu dragit igång en träning av israeliska vad kan man kalla det för? Civil servant, det kallar man för statstjänstemän, ja tack. En utbildning för att höja kompetensen hos israeliska statstjänstemän. Det behövs, kan jag ju säga, bra. Och det är det hon brinner för. Och ja, hon kommer nog att berätta lite mer ytterligare, men en gedigen bakgrund inom både UD, i det militära och i det israeliska samhället. May I welcome Ruth to the podium and the stage is yours. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you and good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. This is my very first time in Sweden. I guess I should have come in the summer. It would have made things easier. But for someone who's coming from Israel, who's right now these days, we have about 25, 26, even 28 degrees. It's a nice change. It's a nice change to see the snow. And I congratulate you that you are able to endure such a strong winter. Luckily, we are March and spring is coming. That's the good news. I would like to speak to you and to describe a little bit the 4 major challenges that Israel on its 70th birthday is facing. We have created a state really out of nothing after 2,000 years of history in Jewish people dispersed in all of the diasporas. Jews came back to the ancient land and created a new state. And we are, it's an honor, it's an excitement, and it's an historic fact that we will be celebrating in 2 months' time 70 years of independence for the State of Israel, the Jewish homeland of the Jewish people all across the world. And yet we have to look not only for the next 70 years, but for the next 700 years, and even more than that. And if we want to build a state which is really for the long run, and a sustainable state, if you will, there are several severe challenges that we need to address. And I would like to elaborate on each and every one of them. I should mention that the 4 challenges that I'll be speaking about is the security challenge, the economic challenge, the society challenge, and the regional challenge, and of course they are all intertwined if we want to create a sustainable state for the future generation to come. So I'm very glad that Ohad Hemo was here just before me, and he described to you really in graphic terms almost what the encounter of meeting the Islamic Jihad, the Hamas, the Hezbollah and others are on a daily basis from his experience really on the ground. And I want all of us to bear in mind the stories and the picture that he has showed us while I'll be speaking more strategically about the security challenge of Israel. But bear in mind that these are the people, these are the organization, and these are the dangers, as Ohad was describing them, that we are facing on the day-to-day basis in Israel. If I have to characterize strategically the security challenge, I would say that the end of conventional war is almost over, and we are in a different type of war. This has been going on now for 30 years in an asymmetrical type of warfare, which means that the army, borders, and army fighting one another, as we have seen in the Yom Kippur War, are no longer existent. We don't have anymore this type of war. We have a totally different type of warfare. And the different type of warfare is both unconventional and subconventional. The unconventional, if the conventional are army fighting one another, an air force fighting another air force, an armory fighting armory, if I'm talking about the unconventional type of warfare, then we have to bear in mind nuclear threats. nuclear threats for us in the region, in the form of Iran, is a very severe one. The rest of the world is facing now North Korea and its nuclear threat. And we've seen, unfortunately, in recent months, how close things can be. I mean, we hear about nuclear warfare, and we are sure that deterrence or mutual deterrence will stop any possibility of a nuclear attack. Unfortunately, it takes one crazy man at the end of the line with the right button to push, and we've seen how close things could have been with North Korea. What we are trying to avoid in the Middle East, in the whole region actually, much more than the Middle East, because this is threatening also other parts of Asia and Africa, is Iran becoming nuclear. But when we are talking about the unconventional, nuclear is the first and foremost priority. As part of this, we've seen missiles being introduced into the Middle East arena. We've seen it at the beginning with small Katyusha rockets coming from the Hezbollah in the north in Israel during 2006, the Second Lebanon War. We've seen it time and again from Gaza. But nowadays, we know for a fact that the type of arsenal that both the Hezbollah in the north have and even in the Gaza Strip, the Hamas have, we are talking about missiles that could reach Tel Aviv. And basically, for the first time in our history, Tel Aviv could be reached by missile either from the north or from the south. We used to think that the Hezbollah is threatening only the northern part of Israel, and Hamas is threatening the southern part of Israel. Unfortunately, and this is the bad news, Israel is covered. Potentially, the threat of missile is covering basically most of Israel nowadays because of their range and because of their capabilities. So this is the unconventional type of warfare that we are facing. The other one is the subconventional. And by subconventional, I mean all type of terrorism that we are seeing and all type of warfare that we are seeing for the past 20 years or so. I was a brigadier general in the military during 2002 and 2005, which we called in Israel the Second Intifada, which I call the War of Terror. This is a terrible period during 3 years of 20,000 terrorist attacks in Israel. And the worst of them, suicide bomber, car bombs. I mean, we have seen really terrible, terrible terrorist attack being in Israel. Now, what is a terrorist attack? A terrorist attack could be one person deciding to create an effect that is bypassing the military. Terrorist, suicide bomber, car bomb are not against military target. They are against civilian. It takes one suicide bomber to go on a bus in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Afula, Bet Shean, Beersheba, and the list goes on and on, to detonate the explosive on his body and becoming a suicide bomber. And for him, the success is that by dying, he is killing with him 20, 30, and more people. And he's killing civilian. He's not looking to kill or harm military. He's not going to fight the army. He's bypassing borders, bypassing military, and going straight to, if you will, to the soft point of any society, which is mother, children, men going to work, coming on a bus or entering a shopping mall, and there a suicide bomber detonate the explosive. This type of terrorism, we have seen it before, but it became really a type of warfare during this period at the beginning of 2000 and on. And we have seen the terrorists becoming more and more clever, I should say, sophisticated, I should say, in the type of manipulation that they were able to do with explosive and entering really the softest point of the Israeli society. So we had the border. So we had the wall. We had the security fence. And the security fence stopped a great deal of the car bomb that used to be driven to Israel. It has stopped a numerous number of suicide bombers as well. But then the tactic changed. And nowadays, with a knife, you can create havoc, you can create fear, you can create casualties. No, not as much and not as many as an explosive, but yet if you are looking, which is exactly what terrorism is opting for, to disrupt the daily life, to disrupt our life as a normal, democratic, open society, it takes one person with a knife, one person with an explosive. Sometimes, unfortunately, we have seen women wearing explosive on their body and turning into suicide bomber. It takes just one person to create this kind of fear among a society that otherwise is used to live with free border and used to live in a total freedom. As parents, we were not afraid to let our children go to the movies, to a shopping mall, or to go on a bus. During that period, 2002, 2005, 20,000 terrorist attacks of the worst possible, imaginable form. We were all, as parents and as Israeli living there, afraid because you never knew where you will meet the next danger. Subconventional warfare means also the type of tunnel. Ohad was talking about the tunnel in the Gaza Strip. We know for a fact that the Hezbollah is trying to curve a tunnel in the northern part of Israel as well. Their grand plan is to have tunnel inside Israel, inside one of the localities in the northern border, through which, at any given moment, when they decide, they will incorporate 20 or 30 or even more terrorists, fully armed with explosive, with gun and machine guns and etc., and try to conquer, even for a few hours, to conquer an Israeli localities, an Israeli village. And to put the Hezbollah, the yellow Hezbollah flag on top of it, this for them would be a huge success. And we have the tunnel in the southern part of Israel. If you are a child, let's say your name is Danny, and you are 6 years old, or 10 years old, and you grow up in the southern part of Israel, near the border with Gaza, by the age of 10, you have experienced already 4 or 5 times of warfare during the summer, where we have rockets and missiles being thrown, and we have children running to the shelters with less than 30 seconds notice from the moment the alarm is being signed off. But even then, during the war in 2015, we have found tunnels that were reaching very close to Israeli localities, to Israeli communities. They were very close to incorporating terrorists through those tunnels, and that they would pop up from the underground right in the middle of a village. And right in the middle of this village would be able really to kill everybody around them. They did this once. They came out near a military post and killed 6 of our soldiers in those military posts. They popped out from the field, out from the ground. Nobody saw them coming. The sub-conventional dimension of this warfare through the tunnel is very, very worrisome. We in Israel are not losing any effort, using our startup nation and great mind alike to try and come up with innovative ideas how to stop those tunnels, because they represent a real threat to the state of Israel. Now, if you look at what I've described, you have the state of Israel with one of the strongest military force, the IDF, not only in the region, but maybe all over the world. We have a wonderful Air Force that is capable of doing, and we have proven this throughout the year, but against this type of warfare, there's not much one can do. You have to be vigilant at all time. You have to gather information, intelligence, as much as you can in order to prevent the next terrorist attack. And the war of deterrence, which is usually very effective when we are talking about unconventional weaponry, such as nuclear weapon, is much less effective when we are talking about the sub-conventional type of warfare in the military. So here, if you have one of the biggest challenge of Israel, and we rely mostly on our intelligence, on our deterrence factor for the unconventional type of warfare, and containment too. I mean, we need a solidified and a strong society that is able, despite the fact that we have seen terrorist attack in buses, still go on buses. We need strong people and strong society and strong community that is able, even after terrible terrorist attack and after rockets landing just in our backyard, to be able to go tomorrow morning, continue to work, continue to do what we're doing, sending our children to school, and continue our daily life. Because if there is one thing by which you can fight terrorism, is to continue with your daily life. If you stop your daily life, if you are afraid of going on a bus, shopping or sitting at a coffee shop, by that you have given victory to the other side, to terrorism who are trying to instill fear among us. And I think that the fact that the Israeli society, year after year, for 10 years, for 20 years, for 30 years, for 70 years, is able to go to war, all type of warfare that we have seen, and yet continue with a vibrant society, with a good economy, is really a victory of the Israeli society over terrorism and over its enemy. That leads me to the second challenge, which is the economic one. So yes, for many, many years you hear, and it's still true. Unfortunately, Israel has to devote a great part of its budget, of its national budget, for military affairs. Unfortunately, this is something that, as long as we do not have agreement in the region, I will talk about this a bit later on, we have to devote a great part of our budget to military and defense affairs, and this continues to be the case. Slowly, slowly, we are trying to shift a little bit the balance and understand that in light of those threats that I have described, we have a good enough answer. We will never have the ultimate answer. It's endless. But we have a good enough answer, and it's time for us now, without disregarding, of course, the military and the security challenge, to invest part of our budget, part of our effort, part of our mind and innovation into the economy of Israel. And we are called a startup nation, and this is not just a nice name of a nice book, but this is a reality in Israel. The number of startups in Israel, the fact that the startups in Israel are the economic engine that drive the economy train is a true thing. I think that we are blessed being a very heterogenic society. We are blessed with innovative ideas that when some of them mature in different forms and in different subjects. It could be in health, it could be in defense, and it could be in education, welfare, and others. I think that we are very lucky to be the startup nation. But then, on the other side of this equation, of being such a strong, innovative state with a strong economy, with a very strong economy, we are also among the 1, 2, 3 countries that are heading the Gini index, which is the index that is measuring the distance between the very rich in one country and the very poor in the other country. And Israel, together with the United States and Mexico, are among those countries where the difference between the very poor and the very rich is huge. And this is something which is not sustainable along the way. If you are Dani, who is living 10 years old in Yerucham or Dimona, or in the northern part of Israel, or in the southern suburb of Tel Aviv, it might be that you are part of almost 1 million children in Israel who are not eating enough because their parents do not have enough money. And they depend sometimes on NGOs to provide for their meals. Now, this is not a modern state. This is not a way a modern and solidified country should treat its citizen. It is up to the government to make sure that together with the startup nation and the strong economy that we have, that the dividends or the fruit of this very strong economy will percolate and will filter and will get to the less fortunate of the society. We need to close the gap. We need to talk in terms of inclusive growth, and not the growth of only certain factors in Israel, while the rest are lagging behind. And in this sense, we have a great challenge in front of us. We are working very, very hard, but this gap is not closing, not quickly enough, and not good enough. In order to close this gap, we have to incorporate into the labor market in Israel people who until recent years have not been working, like certain part of the Haredi men, who were sitting and learning, but were not going into the labor market. We have special program now to educate them, to give them skills, and to incorporate them into the labor market. There's a very big effort on the part of the government of Israel to incorporate or to absorb inside the labor force Arab women, for example. Until very recently, it was not common for an Arab woman to go and work outside of her home. She worked only at home. But as things are changing and we are modernizing our life, we need more and more people to go into the labor market, and we need more and more people to contribute to the economy of Israel so that we can close this gap. So we don't have those terrible gaps between those who are living in Herzliya or Savion or the finest neighborhood in Jerusalem, and on the other hand, we have children who are not eating enough in terms of their health, and we have both in Israel. I think that there is a very solidified effort on the part of the government of Israel to try and close this gap and really talk not only in terms of growth, but in terms of inclusive growth. This is a huge challenge ahead of us. Continue with innovation, continue with a strong economy, but make sure that the less fortunate are part of it. Here, where you have a welfare state, you know that equal health services are given to everyone who's paying taxes. Unfortunately, this is not always the case in Israel. And if you are richer, you can get better health services or better education. And this is something that we feel, in terms of moral ground, is not good. It's not right. That's not the way we should be, and we have to improve that. This leads me directly to the social challenge. So yes, Israel is a heterogenic society, which I say is very good in terms of innovation and in terms of very vibrant societies. We have people in Israel coming really from all the countries in the world, as you know, from that country and from Denmark and from Germany. And like my parents, I was born in Algeria. I came up to Israel, to Beersheba, at the age of 3. So my parents came from North Africa, and like them, many, many others, and Jews from Asia and Africa and all around the globe. And that creates a very heterogenic society. Some say that in modern Israel, we are beginning to recreate the 12 tribes of the biblical era. And this is not something that we are looking for. We don't want to continue and live in tribes. And those tribes could be between the north and the south. Those tribes could be on the basis of ethnicity, from where you are coming from. Those tribes could be on economic basis, those who have and those who haven't. And in this sense, our main challenge is to create not a nation of tribes, but one nation for all tribes, or one nation with one story, which is the very vibrant and the very powerful Israeli story, which says that it doesn't really matter from where you came from. It doesn't really matter where you were born. But if you are able, if you are capable, if you are working hard, you will make it. My parents came when I was 3 years old. They were in interim housing. They lived for a period in a tent. I grew up in Beersheba, which used to be, in those days, even farther away than it is today in the south. And yes, through hard work, through education, you build yourself. And my children today, of course, they are the one who will succeed. I mean, we do this for our children. My husband is an Ashkenazi. I'm a Sephardi. His parents came from Germany. My parents came from Algeria. His parents built a kibbutz. My parents built Beersheba. Those are two contradicting almost stories. But together, we create a home, we create a family in Israel, and for our children, it doesn't really matter. They have these grandparents and these grandparents. They don't ask a question. For them, their identity is clear. They are Israelis. And the Israeli story, the Israeli narrative, is broad enough to include all the tribes, including the Israeli Arabs. Unfortunately, a lot of time we're putting the emphasis, and rightly so, because we are the homeland for the Jewish people. So yes, Israel is the only country in the world which is the homeland for the Jewish people. But inside Israel, we have close to 1.5 million Israeli Arabs that want to be part of the society. That most of them are very good citizens who are working, paying their taxes, and have all the rights, or should have all the rights as we do. And I think that in terms of inclusion inside our society, so if I was speaking about inclusive growth, I want to talk now about inclusive society that is really incorporating everybody, where everybody doesn't really matter how much you earn and where you came from, you are able to say, I'm a proud Israeli. We are on the way. We have done a lot of progress in those 70 years, but we still have a way to go. And I think that the more minded we Israelis are to do that, I think that we'll succeed if we only put our mind into it. The regional challenge is a challenge that for me could weave among all of those challenges that I've spoken about. By the regional challenge I mean, as Ohad was describing a little bit, we have an historic opportunity these days in the Middle East where, because of the Iranian threat, you find the Sunni regime or the Sunni countries like in Egypt, like Jordan, like Saudi Arabia and some part of the Emirate, you find, or they find, a common goal together with Israel. And for them, Israel is not the problem. Israel is the solution. For them, the power that could be the equivalent of the threat of Iran is Israel. And we have maybe an historic opportunity to create not only intelligence and military or security ties with those countries, but even to enlarge our economy into a regional economy, to have projects being done together, to think in terms not of a zero-sum game, not I'm strong, I'm powerful, and I don't care about my neighbor, but to say, no, the other way around. If my neighbor has work and does not have as a place to work, a place to eat, and they feel safe, if my neighbors are safe, I will be safe as well. The regional approach gives Israel really an opportunity, which is an historic opportunity. The big question is whether leaders on both sides of the aisle will seize this opportunity and say, I recognize something important here, and maybe we should do something about it. Now imagine a regional agreement, both on economy and on security, with some of those countries, where we can enlarge the growth, our economic growth, where we can fund or take part of the budget, not only for military, but to send it more to welfare services, to health services, to education. If we were able to do that, I think that we will be able to talk in Israel in terms not of 70 years of independence, but 707,000 years of independence. But now that takes leadership. That takes leadership. And it takes leadership on both sides of the aisle. As an Israeli citizen, I have a lot to say to my leaders. I think that they are not doing enough. I think that they are not proactive. I think that they are too responsive. I think that they are busy wasting time instead of seizing the time and seizing opportunity. Yes, we Israelis are innovative, but we could be innovative not only in economy, not only in military. We could be innovative in diplomacy. We could be innovative in creating agreements that are different. And we might have potentially good partners for this. The Israeli-Palestinian problem is not going to be solved between Israeli and Palestinian alone. The Palestinian problem is very much a problem of Egypt as well as of Jordan. Jordan cares about Judea and Samaria and the West Bank, and Egypt cares about the Gaza Strip and Sinai, etc. It's only if we enlarge the scope of it and we look at it regionally that we will be able to solve this Palestinian problem, because we need to solve it. If there's one thing that I'm wishing my country, after 70 years of independence, is solid, strong, and protectable borders. Borders. Every regular country has borders. We don't have secured and recognized borders in Israel. And to do that, we need to be much more proactive, much more innovative in diplomacy and in the political field than we are right now. Right now, we are using this innovation for economy, very good. For the military, excellent, not enough. And I think that if we were to think in more regional terms, and to use really all the assets that we, as an independent and vibrant society, have accumulated throughout the years, I think that we will be able to say the future generation will not only celebrate 70 years of independence, they will celebrate many, many more decades and even century of independence for the state of Israel. I think that in this period of time, my generation, I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, I've been in the military, I served 20 years of my life in the diplomatic force, I served more than 15 years in the military, and I think that the role of my generation is to make sure that what we are giving our children and grandchildren is a sustainable state, a state that will live forever, no less than that. To do that, and with this I will finish, to do that, and in order to be able to answer the challenges that I've mentioned, we need help. We need friends who support this type of effort. We are living in an era where the answer, unfortunately, the answer to globalism is populism. We see it in Europe. We see the rise of populist parties in various places in Europe, and part of the populist sentiments, which is against globalism, is not only patriotism, but it's also xenophobia. It's also against minorities, and it's against the Jews, and we have seen a rise in anti-Semitism in many, many places. Unfortunately, we see those waves in the United States as well. It's not only Europe. Once the United States was different. It's no longer different. And we see the rise of populism in the United States, and we see the rise of anti-Semitism and xenophobia in the United States as well as here in Europe. And those are threats to all of us. Not all of us not only all of us Israelis, not only all of us Jews, not only all of us friends of Israel, but to all of us modern, democratic, Western societies. This is a flag against our way of life by saying those are not included. We exclude. Today is the Muslim, tomorrow is the Jews, the day after tomorrow it's somebody else. And with this exclusion game, we are ending up our Western culture as it should be, which is a culture of inclusion, which is a culture whereby you succeed by your merits and not by who you are, but by what you do. I wish and hope for all of us that we can overcome this tidal wave, which is right now rising in Europe and in the United States, and unfortunately in Israel as well, I must tell you, and look and hope and pray for leaders who are bigger than what we have seen right now, and that are able to tackle those challenges with courage and with a long-term vision. I wish to all of us that we'll find those leaders. Thank you very much.
Ruth. Vi har tid att ställa frågor. Vi har gott om tid att göra det. Thank you for an excellent overview, and I think there are holes we want to check and get some more information. Så, är det någon som har ytterligare frågor?
They are tired.
My opinion is that the women in Israel are the ones who are most equal with the man. Is that right? I think so.
I think we are better, no? Okay. Yes. The Israeli society in terms of men and women is more equal than we've been before. But as a woman, there's still a way to go. Still in the Israeli civil service, and this is a sad fact, women are earning a little less than men. Still in the political field, you have many more men than women. I strongly believe in women's leadership, and I would like to see many more women in Israel in leadership roles. I think, not because I have something against the men, I think that they are doing a wonderful job. I think that we can do the same and maybe a little bit better.
Something about what's your, let's say, forecast on the political situation? The Israeli political or parliamentary system is, let's say, very vulnerable. Maybe you have a comment, and we also have a prime minister who is kind of in a limbo right now. So maybe talk a little about what you as an Israeli, how you look at it.
We are in a difficult period in Israel. We are about to witness, potentially, a second prime minister being accused of corruption, and maybe even being prosecuted. Now, this is sad for us in Israel. We have an issue of corruption which is really eating our daily life and our norm. And this was not always the case, and this does not have to be the case. I think that one of the terrible things that happens to us in Israel is that we are beginning to become used to it. And we are saying, yes, we know that there are terrible stories of corruption, but then what can you do? He's the only leader, and maybe he should continue and be a prime minister. I'm very much against it. I think that the Israeli political system is a bit in stagnation. I think that many more youngsters should go into politics. Part of the program that I am doing is really to incorporate many more youngsters into the civil service. And by the same token, I think that many more youngsters should go to politics. I think more women should go to politics. I think more social leaders, people who are coming from all walks of life, in business, in economy, in a social program, should go into the Knesset. And we need to overcome a very difficult period that we have in the Knesset. When I was talking about populism, we have populist leaders in Israel as well. Not one, not two, many. And the language is a populist language. David Ben-Gurion, our first prime minister and the founder of the State of Israel, used to say, you don't need on every question to ask the people what they want. You as a leader need to know what the people need. And to do the right decision at the right moment, sometimes it's not popular. But sometimes this is the right decision to take. And I long and I miss for this type of leadership. Political situation right now in Israel is not very good. We probably will have election by the end of this year, even before the Knesset and the government finish its term. Unfortunately, it's going to be also on the backdrop of corruption accusation against our leaders. And I think that this is a real threat to the vibrant community that I was talking about. I think many more people, like myself and others, are rising and are saying maybe our duty is to go exactly to those places in order to clean them up. Many more youngsters should go inside the Knesset and replace some of the people there, because we need a healthier society and we need to clean corruption. And I promise you that the next election are going to be about that and not about something else. This is the only way that we can heal the Israeli society.
So can you see any new positive leaders, both on the Palestinian side? Can you see any new positive leaders in the near future, both on the Palestinian and the Israeli side?
I will start with the Palestinian, because that's more difficult. Abu Mazen is at the end. He's 83 years old, he's very sick. His tenure was mostly sit and not do very much. Unfortunately, we, Israelis and Palestinians, are a mirror of each other. They were not proactive as well. They were just looking how to stall time and not come up with new initiative. And I think that Abu Mazen will be remembered in history as the one who have missed an opportunity and an opportunity and another opportunity to come to the negotiation table and maybe strike a deal with Israel. But I see behind Abu Mazen young Palestinians whom I met, some of them, in various peace negotiation and peace discussion that I participated in. I met Palestinians, the age of 40 years old or so, young entrepreneurs, young businessmen, young doctors, young social workers, and what they want is to build their own society. And I believe that the next generation is going to be, Palestinian next generation and next leadership is going to be less busy with ideology and slogans and more violence, and much more building their own country and building their own state. I hope that. They are in danger of the extremists. You've heard about the Islamic Jihad. You've heard about the Hamas. Those are real threat to the Palestinian society. Most of the Palestinian society is those youngsters and not those extremists. The big question is who will win. And if the future generation is those young professionals who will take power in the Palestinian Authority, then maybe we have the chance. And I pretty much would say the same for us Israelis. I think that we are about to witness, I hope, a change in the leadership generation in Israel. To see maybe younger leaders, more diverse, that are coming from different walks of life, not only from the military or the political realm, but people who are coming from the outside. People who have done their life accomplishment in business or economy or in any other professional walk of life, and now understanding that the next challenge is to go to Israeli politics. So you ask me if I'm optimistic? I am, because this is who I am. I'm always optimistic. But I think that in order not to be a foolish optimistic, we have to work very hard for that. And I know that many people in Israel are working for that. So yes, I hope that this will happen. I hope. So by ending, I just want to say a word to you. I came here, snow greeted me. It's very cold outside, and I'm very happy to have been in this hall and witnessing the warmth that you have towards Israel. I thank you for that.
Thank you. Yes. One question? Yeah, we have one last question. Yes. A statement. Okay.
I would like to make a statement. I am one of those who came to Israel exactly 70 years ago, March 1948. And I want to salute you as I want to salute my country, and I am overwhelmed. I am proud that we have people in Israel like you, madam. Thank you very much.
Ruth, it was a pleasure having you here, and I think you very well illustrated the introduction I had of bringing Israel to Sweden, the flavor, the challenges, the hope for a future, and that we will celebrate not the 70th, but also the 80th and the 90th. Yes, Mitzvah Hashem. And hard work. As a little token for gratitude for coming on a very quick tour to Sweden, here's a little present. Yes, heavy. It's heavy Swedish glass. Thank you very much. Thank you. Ja, Ulf, det är väl slutet på eftermiddagen här. Tack att ni kom allihopa och lyssnade och ställde frågor och var intresserade. Glöm inte, vi är här för att visa vår stöd med Israel. Jag tror ni förstår varför det är så viktigt att vi alla här finns och bidrar på olika sätt. När vi kommer till Israel så får de ett bevis på att det finns människor där ute som i deras svåra verklighet stöder dem, tänker på dem och vill hjälpa till att minska det här gapet som tyvärr finns i Israel mellan de rikaste och de fattigaste. Och det vi gör, eller ni gör, vi tillsammans allihopa gör, är fantastiskt och det är väldigt, väldigt uppskattat i Israel. Vi får väldigt mycket respons och tacksamhet därifrån. Ni ska veta att så är det. Och våra skyltar och våra insatser förändrar människors liv och ger dem hopp och framtid. Tack ska ni ha och glöm inte att skicka in ett litet bidrag. Tack och ha en trevlig helg.